Number 10. The underground suspect. The potato crossed an ocean and arrived in Europe carrying enough nutrition to feed entire nations. The locals decided it was probably cursed. Spanish ships brought it back from the Andes in the 1500s after encountering Inca farmers who had grown it for thousands of years. On paper, this should have been one of the greatest agricultural moments in history. Instead, Europe spent the next 2 centuries treating the potato like a threat. The tuber grew underground, hidden from sunlight. That alone made people deeply uneasy. Scripture made no mention of it. Its shape looked strange and deformed. And because it belonged to the nightshade plant family, which includes several genuinely poisonous species, people assumed the potato was just as deadly. French peasants refused to plant it. In parts of Germany, local officials banned its cultivation outright, convinced it spread disease. French communities blamed the potato for leprosy outbreaks. That is right. A vegetable that would eventually feed half the continent was being accused of causing one of the most feared diseases of the era. Pharmacists displayed potatoes as curiosities in their shop windows. Wealthy households grew the plants for their flowers and threw the tubers away without a second thought. Nobody wanted them anywhere near a kitchen. Then a French pharmacist named Antoine-Augustin Parmentier decided to change all of that. During the 7 Years' War, he had been held as a prisoner in Prussia and survived almost entirely on potatoes. He returned home certain they were safe, nutritious, and wildly underappreciated. He threw dinner parties for powerful guests and served nothing but potato dishes. He convinced King Louis XVI to wear a potato blossom on his lapel, and then he executed a plan so clever it still gets taught today. He planted large fields of potatoes and surrounded them with armed guards during the day. The guards made the crop look valuable and worth protecting. At night, the guards disappeared. Locals crept in, stole the potatoes, took them home, and planted them in their own gardens. Once they tasted them, the centuries of suspicion dissolved. The crop that had been banned, blamed for disease, and discarded by wealthy households became the fuel behind centuries of population growth across Europe. All because it had the nerve to grow underground. Number 9. The Wriggling Contraband. On the Italian island of Sardinia, there is a cheese that has been technically illegal for decades. It is also still being eaten regularly, passed between families, and considered a point of serious local pride. Casu Marzu starts as pecorino, a firm sheep's milk cheese that Sardinia is well known for. At a certain stage of aging, cheesemakers cut into the rind or leave the wheel partially open. Cheese flies locate it and lay their eggs inside the paste. The eggs hatch into tiny white larvae. Those larvae eat their way through the cheese, breaking down fats and proteins as they go. The result is a texture that turns soft and almost liquid, with a sharp, deeply concentrated flavor. The part most people stop at. When you eat Casu Marzu, the maggots are still alive and moving inside it. For generations, this was standard at Sardinian weddings, feasts, and family tables. Many locals treated the movement of the larvae as a freshness test. If the maggots had died, you threw the cheese away. Living larvae meant it was ready to eat. That was the quality standard. In 1962, Italy began aligning its food safety laws with what would eventually become European Union standards. Those standards classified any food containing live insect larvae as unsafe. Casu Marzu was banned from sale. Health authorities cited genuine risks, including the threat of intestinal myiasis, a condition where fly larvae survive digestion and begin living inside the human body. That is a real medical risk, not a theoretical one. But the cheese did not vanish from the island. It went quietly underground. Shepherds sold it privately to trusted neighbors. Families moved it through quiet personal networks. For decades, it existed in a legal shadow, sold and eaten without ever appearing in a shop. Sardinian cultural advocates have since argued that Casu Marzu deserves heritage food status, the same kind of protection given to other traditional regional products across Italy and Europe. That fight continues to this day. Today, it occupies a strange middle ground, officially banned but culturally celebrated. Some things get outlawed because they are dangerous, some because they are misunderstood, and some because they absolutely refuse to hold still. Number 8. The chocolate felony. If you grew up outside the United States, the Kinder Surprise egg was probably a childhood staple. A thin chocolate shell, a plastic capsule tucked inside, and a small toy waiting to be assembled. Simple, fun, and completely illegal in America. The Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act of 1938 contains a clause that bans confectionery products with non-nutritive objects fully embedded inside them. The concern was choking. Small children could bite through candy and swallow a hard, non-edible object hidden within. That concern is not unreasonable. But Kinder Surprise, made by Italian company Ferrero, placed a plastic capsule containing a toy directly inside a chocolate egg. That put it squarely in violation of U.S. law. U.S. customs agents seized Kinder eggs at the border. Travelers returning from Europe who packed a few eggs in their bags faced fines that could run into the hundreds or even thousands of dollars, depending on the quantity. The eggs were treated with the same seriousness as prohibited agricultural products. Meanwhile, millions of Kinder Surprise eggs were sold every year across Europe, Canada, Australia, and Asia without any notable spike in choking incidents. The difference between those markets and the U.S. was not safety data. It was the specific wording of one regulatory clause about embedded objects. Ferrero eventually found a way around it. In 2018, they launched Kinder Joy for the American market. The package is designed as 2 separate sealed halves. One half contains chocolate cream and small wafer pieces. The other half contains the toy. The toy is no longer embedded inside the food. Legally, that distinction was enough. So the same company that had its products confiscated at U.S. borders for decades found the solution by splitting the egg in two. A global brand, sold in over 100 countries, once treated like contraband in one of the world's largest consumer markets. Not because of harmful chemicals, levels, not because of allergens or sugar content, because of a small plastic toy sitting in the middle of the chocolate. Number 7. The license assassination. Japan has a fish so toxic that the government chose to regulate it rather than ban it outright, creating a licensing system that treats preparing a meal like performing a medical procedure. Fugu, the pufferfish, contains tetrodotoxin. This is one of the most potent natural poisons on Earth. It is hundreds of times stronger than cyanide. Tetrodotoxin works by blocking electrical signals in nerve cells, shutting down muscle function progressively. Breathing stops, and the victim often remains fully conscious while their body ceases to respond. There is no widely available antidote. Survival depends on reaching a hospital quickly enough for doctors to keep the lungs working artificially until the toxin clears. That can take hours. Japanese coastal communities have eaten fugu for centuries despite this. The desire for the dish never faded, even as the deaths accumulated. During the Edo period, the Tokugawa shogunate banned fugu in several regions. Samurai were specifically forbidden from eating it, and the reasoning was strictly practical. Losing trained warriors was considered wasteful and poor military management. In some domains, if a samurai died from fugu poisoning, his family could lose their financial stipend. The government was not making a health argument. It was protecting an asset. The bans did not hold everywhere. Fishing communities kept preparing fugu across generations, developing precise cutting techniques to remove the toxic organs. The liver and ovaries are where tetrodotoxin concentrates most heavily. One wrong cut while cleaning the fish spreads poison across the meat. That mistake is fatal. In modern Japan, fugu is legal but tightly controlled. Chefs must complete years of specialized training and pass rigorous government exams before they are licensed to prepare it. Even with all of that, there are still occasional poisoning deaths each year. The Emperor of Japan is by tradition forbidden from eating fugu entirely. If the head of state is kept away from a dish, that tells you something. This is a food that moved from outright prohibition to tightly controlled permission. A meal that requires a license to serve. Fugu is not comfort food. It is a calculated gamble served on fine porcelain. Number 6. The Trash Rebellion. Today, lobster signals wealth. White tablecloths, butter sauce, special occasions. But for most of American history, lobster was food for the desperate, and in some places, feeding it too often was treated as a form of punishment. In colonial New England, particularly in Massachusetts, lobsters were so abundant they washed ashore in massive piles after storms. The supply was overwhelming. They were ground into fertilizer, mixed into fish meal, and used as bait. When there was nothing else to do with them, they were fed to prisoners, servants, and apprentices. Historical accounts describe prisoners rioting over being forced to eat lobster multiple times per week. Contracts for indentured servants reportedly included clauses limiting how frequently lobster could be served because constant lobster meals were considered a form of mistreatment. Whether every detail of these stories is perfectly accurate or has been embellished over centuries, one thing is not in dispute. Lobsters had no social value. They were called the cockroach of the sea. Eating them was embarrassing. Regulatory attention came from a different direction. In the 19th century, canned lobster became more common, but the canning process was inconsistent and spoiled products caused illness. That brought government scrutiny. Then overfishing began reducing lobster populations along the coast, which triggered conservation laws establishing minimum size limits, protected harvest seasons, and prohibitions on catching egg-bearing females. Those laws still exist in most lobster fishing states today. The status transformation came from technology. Railroads and refrigeration in the late 1800s made it possible to ship fresh seafood to inland cities for the first time. People in Chicago, St. Louis, and New York encountered lobster as a rare imported item rather than a common coastal nuisance. Rare became exotic became expensive, and expensive became desirable. The lobster did not evolve. Its biology stayed identical. What changed was geography and perception. The same creature that once piled up on beaches like trash became the centerpiece of fine dining simply because it traveled far enough from home. Number 5. The Green Panic. Absinthe built one of the most dramatic reputations of any drink in history, and then paid for it with a ban that lasted the better part of a century. Nicknamed the Green Fairy, absinthe became the signature drink of Parisian artistic circles in the late 1800s. Writers, painters, and poets were associated with it, including Oscar Wilde and Vincent van Gogh, though the line between documented fact and romantic legend is often blurry when it comes to absinthe stories. What is clear is that the drink was everywhere in certain social circles, and its reputation was already dark. In the early 1900s, absinthe was banned across much of Europe and in the United States. The accusations were severe: hallucinations, madness, and violent behavior. The main suspect was thujone, a chemical compound found in wormwood, one of the key botanical ingredients in absinthe's recipe. Temperance movements used absinthe as a symbol of everything dangerous about alcohol, and the bans came through with real political force. Later scientific analysis told a different story. The thujone levels in most commercially produced absinthe were far too low to cause the effects that had been described. The real culprits were more likely the extremely high alcohol content combined with the poor quality of unregulated distilleries. But by the time any of that was established, the bans were locked in. In 2007, absinthe was legalized again in the United States, but products containing wormwood still face strict thujone limits set by federal regulators. That created an unexpected knock-on effect. Absinthe-flavored ice creams, candies, and chocolates began running into regulatory trouble. Some products were pulled from sale or required reformulation not because they caused any harm, but because the wormwood content had not been verified against required chemical thresholds. So a dessert could be flagged and removed from shelves. Not for fat or sugar, not for allergens, reasons, but because of a botanical ingredient tied to a century-old moral panic. A scoop of ice cream carrying the legal shadow of 1905. Some foods get banned because they are genuinely dangerous. Others get caught in the grip of history and never quite escape. Number 4. The liver wars. Few foods have generated as many lawsuits, city council debates, and genuine political fights as foie gras. Foie gras is the fattened liver of a duck or goose, produced through a feeding process called gavage. The birds are fed in a way that enlarges the liver well beyond its normal size. The result is a rich, smooth, dense product that sits at the peak of French culinary tradition. In France, foie gras is not just food. It is legally recognized as part of the nation's gastronomic cultural heritage. It appears at Christmas tables. It carries the weight of centuries of cooking tradition behind it. In other places, it became a crime. Animal welfare groups argued the feeding process caused serious suffering to the birds. Scientific panels were assembled to evaluate whether the animals experienced pain, and lawmakers got involved. Cities and states began passing bans. California banned foie gras production in 2004, with the ban taking effect in 2012. Restaurants could no longer legally serve it. Chefs protested and lawsuits were filed from both sides. Courts overturned the ban, then reinstated it. The legal situation reversed so many times that restaurants stopped trying to plan around it. Chicago moved faster, and the city council banned foie gras sales in restaurants in 2006. The ordinance lasted just 2 years before being repealed. Critics called it government overreach into private dining decisions. Supporters called it a clear moral line. The debate was bitter on both sides. In Paris, foie gras appears on menus without controversy and is protected by national law. In parts of the United States, serving it to a paying customer has at various points been a legal offense. The dish itself did not change. The recipe is the same as it was 200 years ago. What changed is the moral framework surrounding it. Once a food becomes an ethical argument rather than just a meal, it stops being regulated by food safety agencies and starts being decided by lawmakers who may have never cooked it. Some foods end up in a courtroom not because of what they contain, but because of what producing them requires. Number 3. The milk underground. Milk seems like the most harmless thing imaginable. It sits in refrigerators and goes into cereal. It is one of the first foods most people consume as infants. And yet, a specific version of it has been treated as contraband for over a century. Raw milk is milk that has not been pasteurized. Pasteurization, named after the French scientist Louis Pasteur, involves heating milk to a specific temperature for a set period of time to kill harmful bacteria. When governments began mandating pasteurization in the early 1900s, they were responding to a genuine public health emergency. Outbreaks of tuberculosis, brucellosis, scarlet fever, and other diseases were being traced back to contaminated milk supplies. Children were dying and the regulations followed. In the United States, interstate sale of raw milk is federally banned. Each state sets its own additional rules. Some prohibit all raw milk sales entirely. Others allow limited purchases directly from farms. A few allow retail sale with warning labels. The same glass of milk can be legal in one state and criminal in the next. Supporters of raw milk argue that pasteurization destroys beneficial enzymes and bacteria, that the taste is noticeably richer, and that adults should have the right to choose what they consume. Opponents point to consistent public health data showing that raw milk carries a significantly higher risk of foodborne illness, particularly for children, the elderly, and anyone with a compromised immune system. What makes this fight unusual is how far enforcement has gone. There are herd share programs where customers purchase a legal stake in a cow to claim their share of its milk outside standard sales regulations. There are private buying clubs, and there have been police-supervised raids on small farms accused of illegal distribution, armed agents, warrants, and seizures of dairy products. Milk, treated like a controlled substance. The debate underneath all of this is genuinely difficult. At what point does protecting public health cross into restricting an adult's right to choose what they eat? That question has no clean answer, but it does come with armed enforcement. Number 2. The vanished root. Root beer is nostalgic. It tastes like candy in old soda fountains and something distinctly American. What most people do not know is that the original root beer, the real version, made the way it was for centuries, no longer exists in commercial form. A government decision quietly erased it. Traditional root beer was flavored with bark from the sassafras root. Sassafras had been used in American cooking and folk medicine long before the country existed, going back to indigenous communities across the eastern half of the continent. Early European settlers adopted it, and herbalists used it widely. For generations, it was the defining flavor of both homemade and commercially brewed root beer. Then, in the late 1950s, researchers began testing saffrol, the primary chemical compound found in sassafras oil. Studies on laboratory animals showed that saffrol caused liver tumors at high doses. In 1960, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration banned saffrol as a food additive. That decision ended traditional root beer. Commercial producers had two options: remove saffrol through an extraction process, or replace sassafras with artificial flavoring designed to mimic its taste. Most went the artificial route. The bottles stayed on shelves. The labels still said root beer, but the ingredient that had defined the flavor for hundreds of years was gone. What makes this worth thinking about is the dosage question. The amounts of saffrol in old-fashioned root beer were far lower than the quantities tested on laboratory animals in those studies. Critics have argued for decades that the extrapolation from high-dose animal testing to normal human consumption was too large a leap. Regulators others chose caution, which is a defensible position. But the result is that most people alive today have never tasted root beer as it existed for the first several hundred years of American history. You can still find saffroyl-free sassafras extracts that preserve some of the character, but the original compound in its natural form is absent from every commercially produced bottle. A classic American flavor, quietly rewritten by a toxicology report. Number 1. The gum lockdown. Chewing gum does not feel like something a government would ban. It is small, sweet, and sold in every gas station and corner shop in the world. But in Singapore, chewing gum was made illegal in 1992, and the reason had nothing to do with health or morality, it was infrastructure. Singapore had invested heavily in building one of the cleanest and most efficiently run cities on Earth. The mass rapid transit system, the city's main subway network, was a particular source of national pride. It was fast, punctual, and spotless. The government intended to keep it that way. The problem was gum. People stuck it on train seats. They pressed it into elevator buttons. They left it on sidewalks and public benches. And critically, someone figured out that a small piece of gum wedged into a door sensor could prevent MRT train doors from closing properly. That caused delays, and delays disrupted schedules and undermined the reputation of the entire system. The government's response was total. They banned the import, manufacture, and sale of chewing gum entirely. Stores stopped carrying it, and tourists were warned. Anyone attempting to bring large quantities into the country for distribution faced legal consequences. Singapore did not pass a rule about disposing of gum properly. It removed gum from the equation entirely. The ban became one of the most internationally discussed examples of Singapore's approach to public order. Find the source of the problem and eliminate it. In 2004, the ban was partially relaxed following a free trade agreement with the United States. Therapeutic gums, nicotine gum, and dental gum were permitted to be sold through licensed pharmacies, with buyers required to provide identification. Casual chewing gum for the sake of chewing remains restricted. So here is where this list ends. You have traveled through poisons, parasites, century-old bans, courtroom fights, and underground dairy raids. And the final entry is gum. Ordinary, flavored, under-a-desk gum. Banned in one of the most modern cities on the planet because people could not stop sticking it where it did not belong. Every food on this list started as something to eat. Every single one ended up as a law.